Raymond Chandler's classic hard-boiled private detective, Philip Marlowe, is one of the most revered in the genre. Appearing in more than 7 novels and a plethora of short stories, the character has defined the private eye archetype. Marlowe has made many appearances worth recognizing, so today I'm going to be taking you through every single one. Before we even get to the first official adaptation of a Marlowe book, the stories were already being used as stand-ins for other detective franchises. RKO, in a desperate need for a detective series, adapted The Gay Falcon, a novel by Michael Arlen. Since the Falcon character only had one novel to his name, RKO pulled stories from other sources and ended up paying Raymond Chandler $2,000 for the screen rights to Farewell My Lovely. They adapted it for 1942's The Falcon Takes Over, the third in the series of Falcon movies. Fox also had ambitions for a series of detective movies and used the pulp PI character Michael Shane as their protagonist of choice. Chandler was paid $3,500 for The High Window as the story for Fox's last Michael Shane movie, Time to Kill, also released in 1942.
You know, you're not a bad brand of trouble, Mike.
No.
In 1944, we would finally see the first official Philip Marlowe movie with Murder My Sweet, another adaptation of Farewell My Lovely. RKO decided that since not many people actually saw the previous version, and that they already owned the rights to the book, that they would take another shot at adapting it. Considered not only one of the best Chandler movies, but also one of the best film noirs, Murder My Sweet delivers with a classic noir atmosphere and a great performance by Dick Powell as Marlowe. The next movie came a couple of years later in 1946, with Howard Hawks' The Big Sleep, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Probably the most well-known of the movies on this list, it boasts great performances by its leads and solidified Marlowe as a classic film character. Chandler had great praise for Bogart, once quoted as saying, "He has a sense of humor that contains the grating undertone of contempt."
Well, you got your pictures. Get out.
Where'd they give you a plane?
Right in
Look,
my...
get out.
The next 2 movies on this list came out within a month of each other in the winter of 1947. The first being The Lady in the Lake, directed and starring Robert Montgomery. While not regarded as well as the films prior, this one is unique in that it's the first movie to use a first-person perspective for the entirety of the film. After that, we have The Brasher Doubloon, an adaptation of The High Window. This movie stars former stuntman George Montgomery as a mustached Marlowe trying to track down a stolen coin. Like RKO, Fox took their previous Chandler purchase of The High Window and decided to give it the Marlowe treatment. The movie opened to mixed reviews and nowadays is mostly forgotten.
Hello.
It would be over 20 years before we would see another Marlowe film, but that didn't mean the world was deprived of the character. Television was calling and Marlowe answered. In 1950, Robert Montgomery's own TV show, Robert Montgomery Presents, would have an episode that adapted The Big Sleep, live on air. Then, in 1954, the TV show Climax aired an episode that adapted The Long Goodbye, notably having Dick Powell reprise his role for the first time since 1944's Murder My Sweet. Both of these episodes are considered extremely rare and maybe even lost completely. Hopefully though, one day they might resurface. Despite Chandler's detest for television, Marlowe hit the TV screen again in 1959 in a show simply called Philip Marlowe on ABC. This time, Marlowe was played by Philip Carey. Chandler was originally contracted to write the pilot episode, but it ended up having to be rewritten because of its excessive length and convolution. In the end, Chandler didn't seem to mind, since he would be getting paid for every episode regardless of his involvement. The show only lasted 26 episodes before its cancellation in 1960. Sadly, Chandler wouldn't even get to see the show at all, passing away in March of 1959, months before its premiere. Marlowe finally returned to the big screen in 1969 with a movie simply titled Marlowe, starring James Garner. An adaptation of The Little Sister, this movie had a modern setting and sadly lost any elements of film noir. Wanting to keep the movie as close to the book as possible, director Paul Bogart clashed with screenwriters, trying to keep references to 1960s culture, like hippies and disco, out of the script. In the end, he only partially succeeded. The movie had mixed reviews with critics, with Vanity Fair stating, "Philip Marlowe is in better need of handling if he is to survive as a screen hero." Fun fact, this movie also stars Bruce Lee in a small role playing a henchman. In 1973, we would finally get another truly great Philip Marlowe movie, Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye, starring the fantastic Elliot Gould giving an unorthodox performance as Marlowe in the early 70s.
Oh, is this where I'm supposed to say, what is all this about? And he says, shut up, I asked the question. Yeah.
Its initial reviews were mixed, but time has shown that this movie stands on its own as a classic, with or without a young Arnold Schwarzenegger as an uncredited henchman. 2 years later, we would get another worthy Marlowe film with 1975's Farewell, My Lovely, starring the great Robert Mitchum as an aging Marlowe. This movie would transport audiences back to the 1940s setting of the novel, complete with classic noir elements that made the earlier movies so great. Critics gave mostly positive reviews, with Roger Ebert saying, "These opening shots are so evocative of Raymond Chandler's immortal Marlowe, archetypical private eye, haunting the underbelly of Los Angeles, that if we're Chandler fans, we hold our breath." The movie also contains a pre-Rocky Sylvester Stallone as, you guessed it, a henchman. Riding on the success of Farewell, My Lovely, Mitchum would return to the role 3 years later in another adaptation of The Big Sleep. Unfortunately, with a much smaller budget, the movie had to make compromises, moving the setting to modern-day 1970s, as well as setting it in England, where the film's production company was located. While the movie was more faithful to the book than the 1946 version, not much else could be accredited to it. Mitchum is still pretty good, but the movie mostly falls flat in style and directing. Worth checking out if you're a die-hard fan, but if you're just looking for the gems, then nothing to see here. With the last effort leaving a bad taste with audiences, Philip Marlowe would make a return to form in the 1980s. Philip Marlowe, Private Eye, was HBO's first dramatic series. Starring Powers Booth as a fantastic Marlowe, each episode of the series would adapt a Raymond Chandler short story. The show kept the 1940s setting and noir tone, lasting 2 seasons, one in 1983 and another in 1986. Here's hoping HBO re-releases all 11 episodes, as the existing DVD sets are considered extremely rare and ridiculously expensive. In the years since the HBO series, we would only see Marlowe a few more times. In a 1995 episode of Fallen Angels, Chandler's short story Red Wind was adapted, with Danny Glover portraying Marlowe. Then in 1998, HBO adapted Poodle Springs into a TV movie with James Caan playing an older Marlowe. This movie was based off the unfinished novel of the same name that Chandler was working on when he died. In the new millennium, there have been some attempts to bring Marlowe back to the big and small screens in America, but nothing has really succeeded. In 2007, there was a pilot shot for a new modern-day Marlowe series starring Jason O'Mara, but it was never picked up. Outside of the States, though, there was a Czech movie in 2003 called Smart Filip that used the character. And then, in 2014, there was a Japanese adaptation of The Long Goodbye that was made into a 5-episode miniseries. The show was set in 1950s Tokyo and renames Marlowe as Banji Masuzawa. I'm sure the character will return in some form or another. A few years ago, Andrew Marlowe, the creator of the TV series Castle, mentioned that he was working on a Philip Marlowe series, but whether anything will come of it remains to be seen. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this journey through the character of Philip Marlowe in TV and film.
That's confidential.
Thanks for watching.